Health Matters with Laura Kopek focuses on matters of health and how we can take matters of our health into our own hands. I'm your host, Laura Kopek, and today is a discussion about the uncomfortable topic of the hidden side to overcoming chronic health issues, our mental and emotional side. A reminder, this episode and all my podcast episodes are for educational and informational purposes only and is not a substitute for medical advice or a medical diagnosis. When I first became a health educator and practitioner, my journey began with getting certified in holistic nutrition. But it was pretty early on in that first year of being in private practice that I realized that addressing food wasn't really enough to help people really optimize and achieve total health and wellness. And so it began a journey for me to become more educated. I went on to get my master's and then several other certifications. And in doing so, I also began to realize in working with people, it's not just the physical body unto itself that has to be brought back in balance, but how we think and how we feel about our body, about our illness, about the things that are in balance, have a direct and unique impact on our recovery. For anybody that has worked with me as a client or has listened to some of the first podcasts I did, I have come to really believe that there are three pillars of health that really have to be worked on in order to bring the body back into balance. And those three pillars are that diet and lifestyle. And when we talk about lifestyle, those are all the influencing factors that we ingest, not just food, but the way that we're managing our stress, the way that we're sleeping, the way that we're detoxifying. That second pillar is the microbiome. Our biomes in our gut, on our skin, in our mouths, they are very unique to us and they influence a lot of our health. And they even have their own genetic makeup, their own unique DNA. They will influence our genes and influence the whole diet and lifestyle. Diet and lifestyle will affect the chemistry in our gut microbiome, as well as having an epigenetic influence on our genes. And then, of course, our genes, which I hope you join me in the series that we're beginning to do on genetics. But there's also three main areas that also influences our health, and it's become something that is very important in the way that I practice and the way that I teach people about how to address the things going on in their body. And that is the mind, the body, and the spirit. We are made up of those things. And the mind, the intellect is our strength, but the ego can be our downfall. And in the spirit, we talk about heart and soul. So I really want to dive into those two areas directly influencing the body, the health of our body, and how we need to think a little bit differently about how we take charge of our health. The first thing to consider and to ask yourself in a really honest and objective way, if you can, is how you're identifying with your illness. We can identify with our illness in both a positive and a negative manner. There's never really a good and a bad. There are different ways that our personality and the sides of our personality will serve us and different ways it will not serve us. And that is the duality of the way that all things, the yin and yang, if you will. And so it's really important that when we come at a side of our personality, especially if it's intertwined in the way that we're going to approach getting better over an illness or a chronic condition, we really need to look at how we identify with that illness. And this is really important because if we believe that our illness or imbalance is serving us in a subconscious and unspoken way, that's going to block our ability to overcome the bodily imbalances, because the way we think and feel about that condition is going to be a problem. I'll give you a couple of just really some basic examples that I've come across, some anecdotal stories from my practice. And so, for example, say that somebody has a chronic condition that has caused them to no longer be able to go to work or go to school, no longer pursue some of those things that they really loved. They're going to feel that they're missing out on those things. But if that person was overwhelmed, overworked, high stress, they may find a certain amount of relief from not having that pressure, not having that fast-paced life. And so there is a part of being kind of laid up that is beneficial. And if you can step back and identify the pieces and take a look and say, oh, well, this has really made me realize how overworked I was or overstressed, or how I had too much on my plate. And is there a way going forward that I can bring some of those things into balance? And if you can start to look at the time management of it, then it can allow that subconscious part of yourself to be more open to getting better. Because if getting better means you just plop yourself right back into this scenario, that actually being that overworked, overstressed, and overwhelmed wasn't really an ideal scenario for you or a complete benefit, then again, that's an area that your illness can help you address and be more self-aware. Like to talk a little bit about what can happen to some women when they can go through repeated miscarriages. A very sensitive subject and certainly a very traumatic event, but it can really take hold, that fear that this is going to happen again. And there can be a subconscious block in working in fertility and kind of trying to overcome that idea that this is always going to happen, or the fear is so great that, again, there's a psychological block to working through. So again, there may be a need for really diving into that, working with a therapist or a counselor, and really working on the fear that, because just working on the physical side of not having that happen again may not be enough to achieve, that optimization of getting pregnant and carrying to term. Another area, and again, a very sensitive topic, is weight loss. And there are many sides to weight loss that have to be addressed when I'm working with somebody, and a lot of that has to do with the psychology of eating, behavioral patterns, addiction may be a part of it. So there's a lot of different nuances to weight loss that have to do with our thoughts and our feelings about food. But the one in particular that I want to touch upon, just to plant some seeds in the event that it could help somebody, and that is if somebody is using their weight as a way of protecting themselves against something that is happening at a subconscious level, or a trauma that they have experienced in their past. And if their weight is protecting them, protecting them from experiencing repeat trauma, from intimacy with somebody that they're not ready to have that kind of emotional vulnerability, then that can block them to getting results with their weight, no matter what we're doing to address it on a physical level. So it's just a really important thing to just maybe start to consider and look at the different ways that we identify with these physical imbalances that have this dual purpose where they might be benefiting us, but at the same time doing a disservice for us. Okay. There is another side to the emotional identification in our bodies with our imbalances. So I want to bring up this idea that stress, illness, chronic condition often has this targeted approach to our body. And that's that an area in our body may become more vulnerable, and that is where inflammation goes. That area may be more vulnerable to where stress goes. But the body also has this unique way of connecting imbalances to certain parts of the body that have a representation to our emotional side. Louise Hayes, I think, was one of the first people to really go public with this notion that every a physical imbalance has a mental and emotional side to it. She wrote a book, How to Heal Your Life, something of that nature. I'll clarify the title of her book in my notes, in my description on the podcast if I'm wrong in that title. But she has this really unique way of talking about certain things, such as possibly areas in our body, say there are issues with our throat or our thyroid, and that might have a hidden emotional component that we have trouble speaking up for ourselves. So there's this really unique way of looking at the things in our body that we just can't, that again become chronic. We just can't seem to overcome them, and looking at the possible reasons that are elusive to us on the surface, that are not really going to be addressed under a diagnostic model. We go to a doctor, we get a diagnosis, we get treatment. None of that is going to look at the underlying reasons why our body has kind of fixated itself into an imbalance. Maybe we have chronic low back pain, and there's no real no real reason underneath the diagnosis. It's not associated with an injury. It's not associated with an autoimmune. I mean, it's possible that somebody may feel a level of instability in their family, in their relationships. Our back is that core, that substance. So I really do think that it's really important to consider that side of chronic illness when we're looking at a functional approach, which is how to look at all the causative reasons why our bodies went into balance or went out of balance, and to bring them back into balance. Okay, next I want to talk about the mental and emotional trappings of the choices that we make that don't serve us. So a lot of, again, if we look at the possible benefit that we might be getting, one of the things that we get from making choices that have an addictive side to them, like food cravings, food addictions, is the dopamine hit. I love that term. It's a really catchy term that kind of helps somebody understand that they're getting this benefit. It's not just, oh, I have these food cravings or I have a food addiction, what is the benefit that is happening? Is there an intimacy need being met? Because that is where you feel good. Is it the dopamine? And looking at, again, having a really honest conversation, being really self-aware, because unconscious eating is just that. It's this mindlessness with which we eat these foods because they give us such pleasure in the moment that we don't want to think about the possible long-term ramifications of eating that way. But a lot of that food, while gratifying in the moment, pleasurable, it becomes looped into, socialization, social activity. A lot of that has a great deal of inflammation. And really, at the end of the day, when I work with people, it is all about their level of inflammation, where that inflammation travels to, their toxicity, their own toxic load, where that toxic load is being stored. Like even joint pain, people think, oh, this is, age, or this is my joints, or this is my just, my muscles. But it's usually there's a component about, the way that we are literally like feeding inflammation into different parts of our body. So if there is that dopamine hit, the question then becomes, where do we get dopamine from a place that is more healthy, more conducive to being able to address those issues with food, whether it be weight loss or removing some of that pain and inflammation? Because to just stop doing the thing that actually gives real pleasure in the moment, that's not sustainable. And so we want a level of sustainability when we're getting better. Otherwise, something that is chronic and deep rooted and long term really just doesn't go away. You might feel a little better in the moment, or you might never even touch upon it. My personal belief is that as humans, we actually all have the potential to be addicts. We all need dopamine, and it is part of what makes us uniquely human. And the question is, where do we seek that out? Where do we get that on a regular basis? And just like all our choices, some of our choices can be healthy and some of them can be destructive over time. So it's definitely a unique part of overcoming our chronic inflammation, our chronic illnesses, is looking at, is the continual choice I'm making destructive to me in the long run? Because that's where I get a lot of my dopamine. Is that where I'm getting some of my personal gratification, some of my intimacy needs met? So more constructive ways of getting dopamine, again, because you can't just say, oh, I won't fulfill my personal needs as a human. It's just looking at, is there a way I can offset this and seek out a more constructive and healthy way to be fulfilled, to have personal fulfillment? Our relationships, our healthy relationships, both the ones that are deep and meaningful, and even the ones that are casual and acquaintances, even strangers can provide, all that can provide a different level of personal gratification and dopamine. We are social creatures, and hugs is a big way to get a lot of, kind of feel good chemicals in our body. And so, people can use anything to, again, it can be damaging or it can be beneficial, depends on, the choices we're making in the moment and in the long term. So seeking out better ways to feel personally gratified that don't put us into this loop where all we're doing is perpetuating the choices that actually are leading to our chronic health issues, can be that first step, again, into getting better in a way that really has nothing to do with, eat this versus that. It is that discipline, it is those choices that over the long haul make our desire to pursue good health sustainable. And so this brings me to my final point, and that is the mental and emotional courage that it takes to really dive in and address those chronic issues, those long-term chronic pain, illness, long-term chronic inflammation, our own toxic load. As an educator, I'm well aware that when I work one-on-one with someone, that I'm presenting them with quality information, with strategies. I will help them work through any of these, you know, strategies that help them kind of put one foot in front of the other. But I'm also well aware that at the end of the day, it comes down to their choices. You can present information and strategies, but it's the implementation and the integration of those things into someone's lives that really is the difference between, someone getting well and someone not. But when there are these blocks that we have that are deep rooted into our belief system about ourselves, or are solving an unspoken problem in our emotional and mental lives, those can really create an obstacle. So I do think it does take a lot of courage to really pursue optimizing our health and wellness, to be willing to face the real issues, whether that be really looking at our behavioral patterns when it comes to food, or looking at the reasons why we gravitate towards addictive behavior when it comes to food, or things that we're doing that are inflammatory that we do on a regular basis, or the way that we approach wellness and possibly block ourselves off to becoming fully better because the way that we are navigating our lives is serving us. Maybe we get more compassion or more empathy from a loved one. And rather than addressing that, we stay in this place. There's a lot of people that negative attention is better than no attention, or it's their only way that they were taught to receive attention. And so if an individual begins to feel they're not worthy of just love for who they are, they may create these changes, whether big or subtle, that are moving them towards that. And again, if that is going to block them from getting well, then having the desire to, eat more vegetables or take supplements is great and necessary. But at the end of the day, there's all these little pieces that come together. Look, my analogy that I give people is anytime there's a chronic state, it's a bonfire. And it's about really breaking it down and figuring out what are the big logs, what are the smaller logs, what are the kindling, what's the lighter fluid, what are the things that we're doing that might just throw a little bit of flame, or what is the things that we're doing that, throw that big dousing and are keeping us from really layer by layer resolving these issues. Seeking wellness, optimizing total health and wellness, it's a journey, and there are a lot of components to it. Some are easier to manage than others, but I do wish you complete awareness and knowledge of all those pieces as you do pursue your own health and wellness. Today's episode was a discussion about the mental and emotional side of our lack of total health and wellness, and what we need to start being more self-aware of, and how we can start to have those conversations with ourselves about that mental and emotional side of our chronic states, and where we might have to work on in addition to just the body. Again, overall total health and wellness is the mind, body, spirit. It is looking at all the different ways that this has both served and not served us, and then looking at those 3 pillars of health to really take it apart and start to move towards total health and wellness. I am your host, Laura Kopak. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I do hope that you'll join us again for another episode of Health Matters with Laura Kopak.